Welcome to A Spot of Story with Danielle Grandinetti. Cozy up with your favorite beverage as we chat about sweet romance, thrilling suspense, and fascinating history. Perhaps you'll find your next read in one of these stories. On this episode of A Spot of Story, Echoes of History, we are stepping back into the 1930s to explore the inspiration behind the setting of Eyewitness Sketch. Eyewitness Sketch is the first book in my Distacio Giornalisti Agency series, a 1930s historical romantic mystery series. Witness Sketch is about finding love at death's door, and death's door is exactly what we're going to explore today. Eyewitness Sketch follows Gabriella Salentino, an illustrative journalist for the Distacio Giornalisti Agency. She never planned to return to her home island at the tip of Wisconsin's Door Peninsula, nor did she plan to witness a murder. But when her life is threatened, she has no choice but to hide out under the protective care of the man she left behind. Deputy Angie Johansson has been coming to Gabby's rescue her entire life, but having her in his secluded home tests the limits of his patience. The woman has no self-preservation, and he has a smuggling ring to ferret out. Except her skills with the sketch pad and pencils may be the very investigative tool he needs in order to catch the bootleggers. With a murder on her trail and criminals evading detection, Gabriella and Andre must set aside the past or risk its eruption, because this time the collateral damage might include more than losing their friendship. It might cost them the lives of those they love. I'm excited to talk about the inspiration here. If you look at the state of Wisconsin, you'll see along the Lake Michigan shore this little bit of land that kind of juts out into the lake, and it creates the separation between Lake Michigan and Green Bay. That particular peninsula is called the Door Peninsula, and at its tip is an island called Washington Island, and the strait between Washington Island and the mainland of the peninsula is called Death's Door. Now, Death's Door is called Porte de Mort. It's a French term literally meaning death's door, so port, the door of death. And the reason it was called that is because of the number of shipwrecks that often happened there. It was a very dangerous passing that ships would have to go through when they went from Lake Michigan to Green Bay. According to Washington Island's history on their website, prior to modern navigation aids, hundreds of ships floundered around death's door because of the landscape and the rocks. To combat that, in the late 1800s, shipbuilders pushed to have a canal built at the base of the Door Peninsula around Sturgeon Bay that led from Lake Michigan straight to Green Bay, and that allowed them to bypass the dangerous passage of Death's Door. They finished that man-made canal in the late 1800s, but that doesn't mean that the Death's Door was any less dangerous. There just were fewer ships that would take that particular route. So as I was exploring where to set my particular story, knowing that there weren't as many shipwrecks up at the tip of Door County kind of lessened a little bit of the danger there, but it didn't mean that there weren't shipwrecks there. It didn't mean that there wasn't danger there. And it just was too much of a perfect place to set my little town. Another aspect of why I wanted to set it on the Door Peninsula was because of a little town called Ephraim. Ephraim is on the bay side of the peninsula, and it is known as being the last dry town in Wisconsin. In fact, Ephraim, Wisconsin didn't lose its dry town status until 2016. Almost, what would that be? 80 years, almost 90 years after Prohibition ended. What went on to create a town that stayed dry so long and that fought against Prohibition in a state where they stopped enforcing Prohibition well before Prohibition actually ended, and were part of the legislation that actually brought about the end of Prohibition. How did a town in a state that wanted to support its alcohol industry stay dry so long? I didn't want to use a real place because I wanted to create my own dynamics and my own challenges within a town. So this little town provided the what if question that allowed me to branch off and create this particular story. I wanted to honor Ephraim's history, give that respectful nod toward Ephraim and its Norwegian heritage by naming my little town after a Norwegian word. Heima is a Norwegian word for home. It is also Icelandic for at home or home again. Washington Island, for example, has a very strong Icelandic background. And I wanted to honor that by using the term Heima as the name of my town. I also gave my characters Norwegian or Icelandic names. I didn't use the Swedish spelling, I used the Norwegian or the Icelandic spelling to provide that connection, whether for Andre Johansson or his father, the Reverend Johansson, or for his boss, Chief Mickelson. I wanted to create that connection to the real life cultural heritage that was there. One aspect that I didn't include in this particular story was the Native American history, how long they lived there. It changed hands among Native American communities before and after the Northern European immigrants arrived. It's a complicated and complex and not without its racial challenges. So, if you would like to learn more about that history, I would strongly encourage you to dig into it a little bit more. If there was a nod to it at all, I chose to do it in a way that I could speak to as a second generation Italian American. My heroine is Italian and is very different looking than all the very blonde, blue eyed Northern Europeans on this island. Back to the setting though. So, Washington Island is the big island that is across the Death's Door Strait. There are a couple islands in that strait, one of which is Plum Island and the other is Pilot Island. I chose to use Pilot Island as my model for Heima Island to create my own little island that had its own culture on it. So I didn't misrepresent any history for these real life places that were inspirations behind this story. And my fictional Heima Island, I based the lighthouse that appears in this particular story off the Pilot Island Lighthouse, which you will want to make a note to look for a future book that will be featuring that particular lighthouse. And there's a bit of an Easter egg in Eyewitness Sketch. Follow my book news to learn more about that because that book is not even public knowledge as of this recording. But back to Heima Island. So, this particular community that I created is a very religious community. And because of the religious nature of the community, they were very pro prohibition. They wanted to maintain this dry community. However, prohibition was not enforced. And so, bootleggers in Chicago would run their illegal alcohol through Wisconsin. Shipping by boat was a whole lot easier if you're trying to get bootlegged alcohol down from Canada. Death's Door was the perfect stopping point, right? Or so my imagination created, which is why Heima Island had a smuggling problem in my book. Deputy Johansson was attempting to uncover who the bootleggers were, and whether he agreed with prohibition or not, this was something that he had to enforce as law enforcement in this particular town. And I wanted to explore some of those emotions as well because of how state officials weren't policing this anymore, but at the town level, he had to. And his father was also the Reverend, who was one of the staunch supporters of Prohibition. So, a lot of family dynamics going on there, which added a whole fun layer to this particular story. The heroine in the story is a sketch artist from Chicago. Though she was originally from this island and they were childhood friends, she uses her skill as a illustrative journalist to help sketch the crime scenes that Andre comes across in the course of his investigation. Anyway, that I will leave for the rest of the story so you can see how it works out. But the history of the island and how the inspiration of the area created my fictional island is what I wanted to focus on today. I hope that it will inspire you to dig into some of the history behind real places like Ephraim and Washington Island, the entirety of the Dore Peninsula, including places like Gills Rock or Ellison Bay or even Sturgeon Bay. The opening of the canal they built to save ships from having to cross Death's Door on their way to and from Green Bay and Lake Michigan. I love exploring geographical history and using that in a book to allow the land itself to inform the story and provide that extra layer of both historical significance, but also cultural and name inspiration. Thank you for tuning in for this journey into the past. You can find additional resources in my show notes, which are on my website, including links to places like the history behind Ephraim or Washington Island, or just to learn more about a way you could visit Door County, which I highly recommend. It is absolutely gorgeous. And if you can't visit in person, I hope you will take a chance and visit through a book by visiting Heima Island in Eyewitness Sketch. Thank you for listening to A Spot of Story with Danielle Grandinetti. We hope you enjoyed today's conversation. Let us know by leaving a comment below, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Discover more information about today's book by visiting A Spot of Story online at daniellegrandinetti.com/podcast. Happy reading!